Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features the Uncanny X-Men number 153, cover dated January 1982. And this cover is by Dave Cockrum, inked by Joe Rubinstein. And it is a very whimsical cover, so it is also quite memorable and eye-catching, featuring Kitty Pryde there in her X-Men neophyte costume. Brandishing her big box of popcorn and her cola, and it looks like she's off to the movies to see a very weird version of the X-Men. We've got Wolverine there, we've got Nightcrawler, we've got Kitty herself and Colossus, Storm there, all transformed and all reconfigured into these different versions of themselves. And when I was looking at this cover initially, this particular figure here surprised me, or well, confused me rather, because I thought it was another version of Storm, but it turns out to be someone else entirely. And don't forget this little dragon down here too. We're going to find out who that is also in the course of the issue. So let's open this one up to the splash page, and we do indeed get a splash page here at the beginning. And this is quite a nice one. This is really nice, by Cockrum and Rubinstein. And our creative team is Chris Claremont, writer, Dave Cockrum and Josef Rubinstein, artist, Glynis Wine, colorist, and Tom Orzechowski, letterer. So it's the main creative team back after a couple of fill-in issues. And there's something that I want to draw your attention to in relation to the origin of this particular story. So Cockrum and Rubinstein are credited as artists there, but Dave Cockrum is really co-plotter on this particular story too. So here is an entry from Comics Creators on X-Men. Just open that there. And the key paragraph is here on this side. So Tom DeFalco asked Cockrum, did he have a large hand in plotting X-Men 153, Kitty's Fairy Tale? And he says, that's one of my favorites. Chris and I co-plotted it, but it was my idea in the first place. I'd just been rereading my Thunder Agents collection, and there's a story in there called Weed's Fairy Tale. Do you remember Weed Wiley? He was a member of Thunder Squad and always had a cigarette in his mouth. Anyway, in that story, he was telling his niece and nephew a fairy tale, and he was using the Thunder Agents characters. Thunder Agents was Wally Wood's creation. I believe that's the story where Dynamo gets buried in a vat of peanut butter. It was a fun story, and I said to Chris, why don't we do our own fairy tale? I explained my reasoning, and he jumped right on it. Next thing you know, he's given me so much material that it should be a double-sized issue or a two-issue story arc. I think Louise Simonson was editor then, and she says, well, we haven't had a chance to advertise it as a double-sized issue, and I don't think the powers that be would think it is a strong enough story to do over 2 issues, so we had to cut the material down some. There'd been a fight involving Fairy Tale Avengers as part of the storyline, but we cut that out entirely. I think it's one of our most popular issues. So there you go, that's the origins of Kitty's Fairy Tale. Cockrum is the one who suggested the idea to Claremont, but the story opens in the aftermath of the end of the previous issue, where the Hellfire Club and Sentinels, under the control of Sebastian Shaw, trashed the mansion, or most of it. So now we've got the cleanup, and I like that. I like to see those kind of like real world consequences of what happened in previous story arcs. So we're getting the aftermath of that here, with the male X-Men characters doing the heavy work there, while Storm is getting attended to by Carol Danvers. So Carol Danvers is in residence at the X-Mansion. Claremont hasn't done very much with her so far, but he will in the upcoming story arc when the X-Men go into space. In any case, it's an opportunity for Storm to speak and catch readers up on what happened in the previous couple of issues with the body swap with Emma Frost. And also we have this little piece between Nightcrawler and Professor X. Professor X has tasked Nightcrawler with assessing the seriousness of the damage, so he reports the danger room, the prime computer, and one wing of the house are a total loss. The hangar complex and our Blackbird aircraft suffered minimal damage. Professor, we cannot effect repairs by ourselves. We lack the tools, the raw materials, the expertise. What are we to do? So the professor says openly to Nightcrawler, the best we can, Nightcrawler, with what we have, but he privately thinks to himself, worried, with a worried expression on his face. He's quite right though. Our physical and financial resources have been strained to the breaking point, and at this moment I see no viable solution. So there's again a real world problem there. As a consequence of the attack by the Sentinels, things just don't go magically back to normal, and I like that in this particular run of the X-Men by Claremont. He's thinking out, well, if this happens this month, what are the consequences for the next month? But now we're moving towards Kitty's fairy tale. So she's putting Ilyana to bed. Ilyana, Rasputin, Peter's little sister, is staying at the X-Mansion. She's there with her Fozzie Bear doll in bed. And in order to get her to sleep, Kitty's come up with the idea of telling her a fairy tale. Also, we get the detail that Professor X has taught all the X-Men Russian telepathically, so they can all communicate with Ilyana and she can communicate with them. So that's a nice little detail too. So Kitty gets ready here to tell her story. By the way, look at her t-shirt. It's an ElfQuest t-shirt she is wearing. So that's a little nod to Wendy Peeney's, and I forget the name of the male creator. I think it's her husband as well. The creators of ElfQuest, and Chris Claremont, a fan of that particular comic, so working in a little reference to it. Also Cockrum as well, so Cockrum too, a fan of the comic. So Kitty gets ready to tell the story there. Hold on to your hats, people, because this one's going to be a beaut. I think I'll call it. Let's turn the page. Get past the ads. We've got a double page spread here. Kitty's fairy tale. And the players are Kitty Pryde as Pirate Kitty. And so we see her transform there. Kurt Wagner, Nightcrawler, as Under Protest, a Banff. Peter Rasputin as Colossus, her true love. Logan Wolverine as the Fiend with no name. That's so hilarious. It's like a cartoon looking type character. Scott Summers as the Noble Prince. The SR-71 Blackbird as Lockheed the Dragon. That's pretty cool. Charles Xavier as the Wizard. Aurora Storm as the Genie. And Jean Grey. And that's who that figure is from the cover. That's Jean Grey, Dark Phoenix, as the Enchanted Princess. And so here we see a real swashbuckling kind of splash of Pirate Kitty and Colossus taking on this crowd, whatever it is that is the background of this. So she opens her story with, once upon a time, Kitty begins in the Caliphate of New York. There lived a young woman named Pirate Kitty. She was known throughout the land together with her stalwart companion and true friend, Colossus. I like that. They were loved by the poor and downtrodden, in whose defense they fought, and hated by the rich, cruel oppressors of the commoners. So she's a kind of a Robin Hood style pirate. And so we see this little action sequence introducing them here, and then they make their way down to the docks. That's a really nice galleon ship that Cockrum has created there and inked by Rubinstein. And Kitty says, let's mosey that way for a closer look, when they see this gang of thugs ganging up on a couple of tourists. So that turns out to be the Noble Prince and the Wizard. So these are the reconfigured versions of Cyclops and Professor X. And just as they're about to get beaten up here, Colossus intervenes, and so does Kitty too, and they run off the gang of muggers, let's call them. It is the Caliphate of New York after all. And so we get this kind of weird, whimsical version of the Professor there, tipped over, coming to again, and basically catching or informing Kitty and Colossus on why they've come to New York. Not long ago, in a desperate attempt to save Cyclops and his realm from destruction, my apprentice, his beloved Princess Jean, allied herself with primal universal forces. She was victorious, but in the process, she was corrupted by the dark side of her soul, transformed into a being of absolute evil. And that being of absolute evil arrives. Once she was a creature of light, now she's one of darkness, a bringer of life, of love, of joy. She's become the destroyer, the chaos, the ravager of worlds. She's Dark Phoenix. So now we get to see Cockrum's version of Dark Phoenix. And it's an interesting one. It's a good looking one, to be honest. And also overall we get an insight here into Claremont revisiting recent X-Men history, specifically, of course, the Dark Phoenix saga. And in the course of this fairy tale, giving Jean a happy ending, a fairy tale ending. Like, what is the conventional fairy tale ending except happily ever after? So we're going to get that in the course of this particular story. So she strafed the harbour with bolts of starfire, sinking every ship in sight. It's really nicely done by Cockrum. Get that close up here on her face. A little use of a screen tone as well on one side of her face. And she says to the group below, I've ascended as far above humanity as it has above the amoeba. I'm a goddess incarnate. I told you what would happen should you continue to defy me. You chose to defy my warning. Now pay the price. But Colossus takes the blast, the starfire blast in the chest, and he survives it. And now the wizard uses this particular crystal ball on her, and it seems to have a good effect. There's good spotting of blacks there in the art as well. And we should get a little explanation of the ball. Yes, we do. So here it is. The wizard, as Dark Phoenix flies away, says, Jean's soul, her true self, this crystal is the only weapon capable of destroying Dark Phoenix. So her true soul is contained in the crystal. And we'll see that come into effect in the climax of the story. So here, Pirate Kitty says, with all the vessels sunk, how are they going to go after Dark Phoenix? Well, this is a little callback to the end of issue 150, where Kitty played a little trick where she was pretending to use psychic powers or some kind of, well, if not psychic powers, rather, not psychic powers, but telekinetic powers, but also as a variation of her own mutant powers, that she was able to raise the Blackbird from the Caribbean, from being sunk in the Caribbean. And so she's doing it here again, but in the fairy tale, it turns out that Blackbird has been transformed into a dragon. And the dragon says, I'm the last of my kind. And every time you ask me help, I'm the one that suffers for it. Only last Yuletide, when you scrapped with that dragon, I was nearly torn to pieces. So a call back to issue 143. So the dragon is, I'm going to point it out on the next time we see him when he speaks, because I have a little theory on which X-Man he is supposed to be a very reconfigured version of. So in any case, Kitty says, has a little oh, here it is. Sorry, here it is. What do you mean, us, Colleen? If you've taken a job, that's your problem. I want no part of it. I'm retired. So the dragon is basically patterned on Banshee, Sean Cassidy, and it has his speech pattern. So that's pretty funny stuff. And then Pirate Kitty's arguing with Lockheed here in order to take them after Dark Phoenix. And then we're back in the present, so to speak, outside the fairy tale, and we get to see Logan and Nightcrawler getting ready for bed because it's nighttime, and Nightcrawler's been listening outside the door at Kitty's fairy tale, and he basically invites Wolverine to have a listen to it. He says that she's telling Ilyana a bedtime story and it's magnificent. Listen and judge for yourself, he says. And Wolverine, lighting up his cigar, says, it better be good, Fuzzy, because I feel pretty silly standing here and I don't like to feel silly. That's such a funny line from Wolverine as well. And then we're back in the fairy tale. So they're flying on the back of Lockheed the dragon, and the professor explains more about the Phoenix Force. So he says, but to all things, all creatures are their proper seasons. The Phoenix Force is meant to be used by an adult. On that cosmic scale, Homo sapiens as a race is no more than an infant. As well, there exists within everyone a dark side, to balance and give meaning to the light. Because Jean lacked the cosmic awareness, the maturity of self to properly contain the Phoenix Force, it disrupted the balance within her soul, and the dark side gained ascendancy. That essential balance must be restored. I only pray that we're not already too late, that her transformation is not irreversible. So that's an interesting perspective that Claremont has worked in here regarding the actual transformation of Jean Grey into Dark Phoenix. Another perspective on that, and a working out of maybe a way that she could have been redeemed if it weren't for Jim Shooter's editorial mandate that she pay a price for the death of the 5 billion intelligent life forms on Debari. So back to the fairy tale. They touch down on this particular island here because the dragon wants to have a rest and wants to go hunting. And then we have the arrival of the Banff creature here. And this little fairy shouts out here big things, seeing Kitty and the others on the shoreline. And this is funny from the Nightcrawler Banff creature, Hush Peony. So another reference to Wendy Peony and ElfQuest. They'll hear you. They're leaving the girl alone. Great, he thinks. So then he teleports onto Pirate Kitty and teleports away. And here he's kind of like being like a swashbuckling Errol Flynn type. I'm a Banff and you're a girl. Want to make beautiful music together, Liebchen. Pretty smart talk from a lady who rides the dragon, he says. And so Nightcrawler here outside whispering to Logan says, I don't know whether to die of embarrassment or strangle Kitty, for the version of him that she's worked up in her little fairy tale. And it's pretty funny here, and obviously Cockrum is having fun turning Nightcrawler into this little doll version of himself and having this kind of really cartoony effect as he is teleporting around. He's in love with Kitty, he says. Yeah, this is amusing stuff from Cockrum in particular. Meanwhile, Storm and Carol Danvers have arrived, and they're invited to listen in on the fairy tale too. So we get more of this cartoonish carry on with the Banff creature, and good opportunity there for Tom Warzikowski to show off his lettering skills as well. And then we're back to the story a little bit, where Colossus is wandering along the shoreline and he finds a bottle in the water and he opens it, and of course what's inside except for a genie. Gods of the earth and air, thy daughter whom the evil one imprisoned is held no longer. And so this is interesting here in this particular anchor image on this page. We get a very cool redesign of Storm's costume by Cockrum. It's nice stuff with the lightning bolt motif really further developed on her cloak and over the body covering of her costume as well. And of course the headpiece there is altogether more elaborate with the lightning motif again. So very, very interesting stuff. So she explains to Colossus that in happier times the evil one was her dearest friend. She used that bond to catch me unawares, and though she found she could not slay me, she did far worse by sealing me in the darkness of that jug. Dark Phoenix has much to answer for when next we meet. So now she joins up with the pirates and with the noble prince and the wizard. And who arrives then? And in the middle of this tornado, it is the fiend with no name carrying a case of colas and with his claws popped there and smoking his cigar, and says, I'm mean. That's pretty funny stuff. So I wonder what Wolverine makes of that, listening outside the door. This is very cartoony from Cockrum here as he pops open a can, grabs it with his tongue and swallows it whole, spits out the empty can. That's a nice little sequence there. So Wolverine outside is having a laugh. So he's saying, Kitty may have, or Nightcrawler says to him, Kitty may have pegged me, mein Freund, but she skewered you. What's the matter, Elf? Jealous, says Wolverine. So Wolverine not too upset by the cartoon version of himself. Next of all, Scott and the Professor join. So everybody's listening now to Kitty's fairy tale. And Wolverine here says, and this is interesting, this kind of revisit again to the Dark Phoenix storyline where he says, I had feelings for Jeannie and she for me. You stole her and you're going to pay. So there's this beef between the fiend with no name and the noble prince, but Colossus gets in the middle of it, prevents them from fighting, and he says, Katya is my friend, you harm her at your pearl. Oh yeah, no one lays a hand on me, Bob. And so we're about to get a scrap between Colossus and the fiend with no name as he pops his claws, but he's grabbed from behind, or poked from behind rather, by Lockheed. He says, whoop-de-doo, just what I've been looking for, dessert. And this is really hilarious, really comical cartooning here as the Wolverine character just basically jumps up on Colossus's back And Kitty intervenes and says, behave yourself, Lockheed. And that goes triple for you, Fuzzy, or else, she says to the Wolverine character. So now they fly off again on Lockheed's back, and they're continuing on their journey to try and find Dark Phoenix and help restore Jean to her proper body and existence. And so the Dark Phoenix arrives, and we're coming towards the end of the story now. We're into, properly speaking, the third act. This is a great version of the Phoenix Force here. The Firebird countering Lockheed, and Lockheed is dwarfed by the size of the Phoenix Force, and out of it emerges Dark Phoenix herself. And she says here, with this maniacal look on her face and the fire emerging from her eyes, how brave you all appear. A pity I can see past that facade to sense the terror in your hearts, but do not despair. That soul shriveling, mind-numbing fear will be as fleeting as your lives, she says. So we get, like, this couple of pages here are really well done by Cockrum, like some action at the end of the story. That's a really excellent panel there. And now we've got Storm, the genie, going after Dark Phoenix and combining with the wizard. And we've got a nice little moment here with Colossus and Pirate Kitty recognizing that they can't play a role in this battle of titans. Suddenly Colossus says, I feel very small and quite useless. We're witnessing a battle of the gods. And Pirate Kitty says, they're our friends, Colossus, and we gave our word. There has to be something we can do to help. So I wonder, what could that be? Well, the Fiend with No Name pops his claws into Lockheed, and Lockheed basically on instinct reacts with this massive fire blast at Dark Phoenix, and they fall off Lockheed's back. Storm here says they're falling, but I can easily save them. The genie spell enveloped Kitty and her compatriots. So what do they end up with? Extraordinary results. Wings. It's a very cool looking version of Colossus there with his metal wings and guns on them, missile launchers. Kitty with the fairy wings, she's not happy with that. This is hilarious. The Fiend with No Name with his bat wings there. That's really, really cool and inventive. And Bamf with his little kind of fairy wings too. So now the noble prince gets his own mode of transport, a magnificent chair. So not only can he fly, but it magically enables him to see through the blindfold that contains his accursed eyes of death. So they all charge in order to help the others against Dark Phoenix. And what happens here too is that Lockheed gets revenge for this by knocking the Fiend with No Name with his tail into the back of Dark Phoenix. And we're coming right to the end now. So we've got a big melee here, everybody attacking Dark Phoenix. And then the wizard uses the crystal and says, he says here, what does he say? He says, a star belongs in the heavens. The rightful home of the Phoenix is the entire cosmos, not in the fleshly casements of a young woman. You've done enough. In the name of mercy, in the name of Lady Jean, be free. So the crystal here is the device that affects the separation of the Phoenix Force from Jean Grey, propelled by the wizards and the genie's will, sustained by the prince's love, a lance of blinding energy, speared into the heart of their foe. The woman disappeared, transformed into its true self, a huge, majestic firebird, and battling it, the soul self of the woman it had possessed, which is what we see here. The combatants, indeed, the entire world watched in awe and terror, as a force that was as old as time, as primal as existence of self, battled a power that would not be denied. Jean had fought this battle once and lost, and innocent lives had paid the price. Given a second chance, she does not fail. So she emerges back in her true body, separated from the Phoenix Force. And also, it's a fairy tale ending, so happily ever after for Scott and Jean. Scott's eyes are cured. When the Phoenix left you, the curse on them was lifted. And so she's alive, a live line of my heart, she says, and very, very well. Lockheed flew our heroes, even Fiend, once Kitty talked him into it, back to the prince's land, where the lovers were married, and they all lived happily ever after. And so Ilyana's asleep. And out comes Kitty, She's asking Peter what did he think of it, but then she finds everybody outside having been listening. She's embarrassed. But this is kind of sweet and touching, the ending here, because of course it's Scott who's bereaved, most particularly with Jean's death in Uncanny X-Men 137. And Scott says, "We thought it was great, especially the ending. Thank you." And he kisses her on the forehead. So, and an interesting final note as well from Claremont, there are myriad dimensions, an infinite number of alternate realities. Somewhere, somehow, Scott knows the lovers did, indeed, live happily ever after, and for that, he's content. So, Claremont, working through this fairy tale, Kitty's fairy tale, in her understanding, she wasn't there for the events of Dark Phoenix, but working through her perspective, her kind of teenage, romantic perspective, a happily ever after, a redemption of Jean, a separation of her from Dark Phoenix, an alternative to Jim Shooter's demand that Jean pay the price for the death of those 5 billion people on Debari. And I think, when you approach it that way, this quirky, whimsical, weird fairy tale, has some heart to it. I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on Uncanny X-Men 153. Let me know what you think of the issue itself in the comments to the video. And if you enjoyed my review, please like it in YouTube because that really helps the channel. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.